I chose this title because I think sometime in 2013 I'd come here to NCCS and had given a talk with the exact same title. And I mean, the content which I'll speak now is very different, but these are really the ongoing situation which we always see in our lives. Everything looks, very difficult in the present. We blame that for people in the past who messed things up. If only they had done things right, the world would be a better place. And if only we were given a chance to set things right, we will make the world much better. And then when we get that chance, we are confronted with the complexities of actually taking decision in a very messy, chaotic, multi-demand system. And then, we are talking to our colleagues saying, you don't understand how difficult it is to get things done, and you don't understand how difficult it was when I was young, and therefore, if we suffered, you should also suffer, and so on and so forth. And that cycle seems to go on. But as I was saying yesterday, India is actually an amazing and fascinating place, and all said and done, it has been extraordinarily successful. And we must actually be grateful to those in the past who made this successful in every field. And the present, while it is difficult and tense, is actually a much, much better present than it was 40, 50, 30, 60, 70 years ago. 60 years ago, 70 years ago, many of us in this room will be dead. The current lifespan is 68 in the country, and hopefully by the time the country is 75 years old, it'll be 75. And this change has come about by changes in agriculture, in vaccination, in better healthcare, and to do that in such a complex country as ours is no mean achievement. So while we constantly despair at the situation, we must also be proud of many of our successes, and to this success science has contributed hugely. So my talk is about, on one hand, celebrating our past through 30 years of the Department of Biotechnology. This, I think, is a slightly exaggerated statement that it's 30 years of excellence. It should be 30 years of striving for excellence. But, one always tries. And it's about how, despite a messy past and a tense present, the future is really ours to make. And the future is ours to make not because we're suddenly woken up, or there'll be inspirational ways by which we can dramatically change things overnight. It's a combination of different kinds of things. Precisely because of the way we have done things since independence, we have today in science and technology an amazing set of people who, no matter which area of science and technology we look at, have the capacity to understand, have the capacity to change, and have the capacity to bring the best science and technologies and invent the best new science, make the best new discoveries and invent the best new technologies for the future. And really, this is unusual if you look at South America, Central America, Africa, all the countries in Africa which became independent soon after India had the potential to be, extraordinary innovators and drivers in science and technology. But India was unusual. It actually invested and became one. And countries in Asia too. If you leave aside, these smaller countries which are successful, quote unquote, like South Korea, Singapore, and Japan is a separate context, India has actually done extraordinarily well. China is interesting, and China has, unlike India, not really been colonized, and unlike India, has had different kinds of momentum and different structures. And China has had 3 decades of about 10% growth, which is extraordinary. So we should not try to say but for this we are like, we could have been better and so on and so forth. We've actually been extraordinarily successful. But if you have to make our future, it's important that we understand the past and the present. And we must look at this specifically from the point of view of the Department of Biotechnology. I'm looking at it from the point of view of life sciences in India. Now there's a tendency amongst us, and this is a dangerous tendency. When we ask about who are the great scientists in India, we think that good science is done only by dead people. Yeah? And we name all the dead people as good scientists. We rarely mention live people as good scientists. And this is a shameful situation in India. Extraordinary science has been done in the last 60 years. Many scientists who have done that work are alive, and we should not shy from praising them. So let me mention some of whom are sadly dead, but there are many others who are around who have done extraordinary work, right? We do talk a lot about J.N. Ramachandran, he's iconic, but D.P. Burma, Shambhunath Dey, Bimal Bachawat, Obaid Siddiqui, Panchanan Maheshwari, they did extraordinary science. People such as, in addition to these people involved in institutions, people like Pushpa Bhargava and G.P. Talwar built institutions. So, each of these is a complex person. When they're alive, they, are all troublesome because they have views on every matter. And you might disagree or you might agree with those views. But that doesn't mean that we should not praise their scientific contributions and their institutional contributions. And that's very important. So let's amongst us here in Pune, in Mumbai, in Delhi, in Bangalore, or Hyderabad, wherever, Kolkata, wherever there are excellent scientists, when you talk to others, when you talk to the press, when you talk to your parents, when you talk to people outside, say, look, this person has done wonderful things under great odds. And we don't have to always say that, mathematics is done only by Ramanujan and no one else. There's a fantastic school of mathematics which grew in post-independence India in TIFR, and that bred fantastic mathematicians all over the country. Other mathematics schools developed. And today I'm astounded to see in many of the new institutions, such as the new ISERs, where we thought we'd have huge difficulty in getting mathematics faculty. Actually, there are very talented mathematics faculty members coming up. So that's all due to these kinds of efforts, and we must praise them. We also have a tilted view of history that somehow the past was always better. That there were great people who fought against all our odds, and they, were so powerful that the bureaucracy could do nothing against them. We think that life was a lot less difficult at that time, and science was innocent and full of romance, and you go to the lab and you look at your test tube or look at the skies and you make a discovery and you come back, Science was never like that. And life was never like that. And these great people had huge problems. Homi Bhabha was asked by the finance officer of TIFR why he was serving biscuits after a colloquium. It's a waste of money. Right? And this is on the TIFR archives. And he had to write back saying, please, we must have this. Actually I was trying to be economical. In Cambridge they serve wine and cheese after the colloquium. So, pardon? Relativity. So, people had enormous challenges. Then we also think that somehow people got along with each other. The bitter fights amongst great scientists, abroad and here, is legion. And scientists, sadly, argued with each other a lot more than they did. Bureaucracy was rife. It is true to a much smaller enterprise, and I'll come to that. And in those kinds of situations, there was interference at all levels. There was poor understanding of the importance of science by internal administration. Bookkeeping was considered more important than allowing science to go faster. And that is the same right now, except that the scale has increased enormously. But the scale has increased both in the positive and in the negative, right? There is an enormous middle class, there's an enormous scientific enterprise. There's also an increase in poverty, there's also an increase in problems. There's also an increase in better processes for funding. At the same time, things get gridlocked. The whole thing is much more complex than we would like to imagine. So this tinted view of history, that's, by the way, a picture of Bhabha's aunt's house in Kenilworth, which she generously gave to start the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, right? And it's not that these kinds of wonderful things don't happen. People are helpful for science, and interesting things happen in interesting places. And what's happened the world over, since the Second World War, science moved steadily, and we saw that in India, from being an effort of individuals in university environments to becoming a major institution. And once it becomes a major institution, all the challenges of science, be it dealing with the spectrum of quality from modest quality to excellence, dealing with bureaucracy, dealing with large resources, dealing with expectations, dealing with missions as opposed to individual scientific programs. So in this situation where science has become so driven by various kinds of institutional requirements, much more so than the old days. Old days there were problems, the problems are bigger, the opportunities are bigger. So how are we as scientists to keep science at the center? As individuals, in our departments, in our committees, in our institutions, and nationally. Now, obviously, there are many serious problems, and those problems have to be addressed. And these I would call gorillas in the room. There are many big problems, and we, in talks like this, someone comes in and says, all is well, life is great, country is doing well, and goes away. That's one view to take. The other view, which is much more troublesome and raises one's blood pressure, is actually to deal with the problems. So there are lots of problems within science funding agencies such as the DBT. Right? We started off small and we grew with enormous enthusiasm with a small set of people driving a new agenda. But as we grew, and over the last 10, 15 years as our funding grew, our buildings, our offices are still the same as 30 years ago, and they are not meant to be a place where quality science agencies can function. So this puts a huge burden on the way our officers work. Our officers have to be challenged, and they are really struggling against processes which are very difficult, and we're trying to change that. So DBT has much to change and much to improve while we look at our new directions. But also, while we as scientists can blame funding agencies for all our woes, we also blame our institution. We say, if only my institution were like this institution or that institution internationally, life would be so much better. But what I would suggest that you try and do is put yourself in the position. Just imagine that you are in charge of your institution for one day or 1 week or 1 month as the director or the dean or whatever, and ask what you do actually do. And you would see that you're caught in a maze of complications in decision making, where optimal solutions can be found, but the perfect solution is not easily implemented. But that's governance everywhere, right? You have to deal with realities which are flexible. And therefore, I would urge us to be generous to institutional leaders, at the same time very demanding. Be generous to your administration, at the same time demanding, and to your purchase system, and to your accounts, and to your finance people and everyone else. Be demanding, but also be understanding in a manner where things move fast despite all the complexity. So that's feasible. We also blame, as scientists, our committees. If only the committee reviewed my grant or my paper, our editors reviewed my paper better, I'm doing really well, but they don't do a great job. And that's considered, the problem. But when we are in committees, do we behave the same way? Do we reduce everyone to a metric? Do we actually pay attention to their science? So we must be, demanding of committees too. In short, we seem to be demanding of everyone, but we rarely are demanding of ourselves. And we must actually, all of us, each of us ask what our problems are and how we can actually improve ourselves, whether we are in science administration or scientists or science agencies and so on. So in a situation like this, where everyone seems to spend a lot of time being critical of everyone else, and they're absolutely sure that if only someone else listened to them, things would be sorted out. The question is there a way out? As scientists, I'm not talking about in terms of science administration and so on and so forth. And the suggestion I was giving, I would hesitate to call it advice, to a colleague this afternoon, was the following. We grapple in our day with, as investigators, as distinct from students or postdocs. Students or postdocs should not be worried about administration. They should be focusing entirely on science. But principal investigators have a responsibility to make science functional. And it can be frustrating for you to actually see how difficult it is to run a lab effectively and make sure that your students and postdocs and yourself can conduct research. So it's important that we try to learn from others who, despite these difficult situations, have managed to do excellent science and partition their day, their week, their month to deal with multiple matters, but also deal with science to make sure quality science comes. Now I'll give you a couple of examples. And one of them is an experimentalist, one of them is a theory person, and you will say, but theory is easy. But theory is not easy to do. Theory requires you to get quality time to think and interact and work. So theory is in many ways as difficult as experiment. Just because you don't use a machine doesn't make you as a scientist your life easier, and because you do use a machine, it doesn't make it more difficult practically. Both of us have to think hard. So thinking is very important and the key. So here are two examples of people who I admire. Veronica sadly no more. But Ashok Sen is an amazing example of doing extraordinarily world-class string theory in a context far removed from centers of excellence. And Ashok not only did that, but he has been the catalyst, along with a few others, Spenta Vadia, Sunil Mukhi, Sandeep Trivedi, Rajesh Gopakumar. These people in Allahabad and Bombay have built, and now in Pune, Sunil Mukhi is here, have built an extraordinary world-class string theory group. This is admirable. India is on the map of string theory, and this is not an easy thing to do. This is an extremely competitive, extremely difficult field. And that's amazing. Similarly, Veronica, through her work, which is not well publicized, has, along with Obaid Siddiqui earlier, been very, very key in developing the area of neurogenetics, developmental neurobiology in the country, and more important, on a much wider scale, inspiring young people into doing quality science, and even more important, inspiring women to get into science, right? And this is a woman who was not an Indian. She was a Kenyan citizen who lost her citizenship because, when Kenya became independent, she retained a British passport which didn't allow her to go to Britain, and she was a non-entity in Kenya, and she went to Ireland, studied there. She could have gone to the West and stayed on, but she was inspired by Indian science to come here, work here, and become an Indian citizen, right? And this is absolutely extraordinary. And so these are the kinds of people, there are many such people around who we should admire and praise and try to emulate. And these are the people who grapple with all the difficulties we have. And these are people who continue to inspire us. And there are lots of us, people here, people in every institution, and we should learn from them. I mean, we may or may not talk about them always, but these are people to be followed. You heard Madhav, you didn't hear, I heard Madhav Gadgil yesterday. Madhav Gadgil is another example of such an extraordinary person. So what does it take to do quality science in India? And how do individuals and institutions deal with it? Every institution, and you can have this in one person or you can have it in 4 different people, you need 4 kinds of people. And sometimes, very rarely, you're lucky to have one person doing all, but that's nearly impossible.